The call came just after midnight, slicing through the silence of a penthouse that had never truly known quiet. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals across continents, faced down boardrooms full of rivals, and slept calmly through market crashes. But the trembling voice on the other end of the line stripped all of that away in seconds. "Sir, your mother has been rushed to the hospital. Her condition is unstable. She keeps asking for you." For a moment, the world's most powerful man stood frozen, staring at the city lights below as if money itself could slow time. Within minutes, the private driver was speeding through empty streets, red lights ignored, the luxury of his life reduced to a blur behind the car window. His thoughts spiraled, every missed call, every postponed visit, every time he told himself there would be more time. Hospitals had a way of making even kings feel small, and as he ran through the automatic doors, heart pounding, he felt fear in its rawest form. Then, just as he turned a corner toward the intensive care wing, he saw something that made him stop cold. His fiancée was already there, not looking worried, not crying, not even searching for him. She was standing near his mother's room, doing something that didn't match the woman he thought he was about to marry. And in that instant, before a single word was spoken, he sensed that this night was about to take more from him than just his peace of mind. He had built his life on certainty numbers that added up, contracts that made sense, people who served clear purposes, but love had always been the one variable he never fully understood. His mother had been the constant, the quiet strength behind every success, the woman who believed in him long before the world learned his name. She taught him discipline when he had nothing, humility when he had everything, and trust when he was afraid of being used. His fiancée, on the other hand, entered his life during its brightest chapter, elegant, admired, perfectly composed in public, praised by friends and business partners alike as the ideal match. Their engagement was celebrated across social circles, framed as a fairy tale union of love and power. Yet as he stood in that hospital hallway watching her from a distance, an unsettling thought crept in. Had he fallen in love with who she truly was, or only with the version of her that existed when cameras were on and doors were open? The beeping machines behind the wall reminded him that time was fragile, that truth had a way of surfacing when no one thought it mattered anymore. He didn't interrupt. He didn't announce his presence. Instead, he stayed still, heavy, realizing that before he could face his sick mother, he was about to discover something far more painful: whether the woman he planned to marry deserved to be part of the family that mattered most to him. The call came at a time when even the city seemed to be asleep. Outside the glass walls of the penthouse, skyscrapers glowed faintly like tired sentinels, and inside, silence ruled a silence broken only by the vibration of a phone left face down on a marble table. He almost ignored it. Billionaires learned to ignore things. But something in the air felt wrong, heavy, as if the night itself was holding its breath. When he finally answered, the voice on the other end was shaking. It wasn't a business partner. It wasn't an assistant. It was a nurse. His mother had collapsed at home. She was unconscious when the ambulance arrived. Her condition was unstable, and she kept asking for him. In that instant, the weight of every deal he had ever closed felt meaningless. The man who owned companies across continents suddenly became just a son who was running out of time. He didn't change clothes. He didn't wait for security. He grabbed his coat and rushed into the private elevator, the soft hum of its descent mocking the urgency pounding in his chest. The driver pushed the car harder than ever before, slicing through empty streets as traffic lights flashed red and yellow like warnings he refused to obey. Memories flooded his mind uninvited, his mother waking him before dawn when they were poor, packing his lunch with hands worn from labor, telling him that success meant nothing if you forgot where you came from. He had promised her he'd visit more. He always did. And he always postponed it. When the hospital doors slid open, the smell of antiseptic hit him like a wall. Nurses moved quickly, shoes squeaking against polished floors. Somewhere nearby, A machine beeped steadily, counting out time in cruel precision. He ran past the reception desk, barely hearing his name being called, following signs toward intensive care. Then he slowed. His steps faltered. His breath caught in his throat. Standing just outside his mother's room was his fiancée. She wasn't crying. She wasn't frantic. She stood composed, phone in hand, her posture relaxed, as if she were waiting for a late reservation, not standing outside the room of a dying woman. He watched from the corner of the hallway, unseen. She glanced around, then stepped closer to the door and spoke quietly to someone inside. Her tone wasn't gentle. It wasn't worried. It was controlled, calculated. And suddenly, the fear in his chest shifted into something colder, sharper. In that moment, before he even saw his mother, he realized that whatever was happening behind that door was about to change everything he thought he knew about love, loyalty, and trust. As he stood frozen in the hallway, he tried to rationalize what he was seeing. Maybe she was exhausted. Maybe fear had made her distant. That's what love did. It looked for excuses when truth felt too dangerous to face. He had met his fiancée during the peak of his success at a charity gala filled with polished smiles and rehearsed generosity. She fit effortlessly into that world. Elegant, intelligent, always saying the right thing. His mother, however, had been quieter in her approval. Never openly disapproving, but never fully convinced either. People show who they are when they think nothing is at stake, she once said. At the time, he brushed it off as caution shaped by a hard life. Now those words echoed uncomfortably in his mind. He watched as his fiancée stepped away from the door and spoke to a nurse. Her voice was low, but her expression was sharp. She gestured slightly, as if asserting authority that didn't belong to her. The nurse nodded, looking uncertain, then walked away. Something twisted in his chest. Why was she handling things without him? Why hadn't she called? He checked his phone again, half expecting missed messages. There were none. A flashback surfaced his fiancée, insisting on pushing up the wedding date, suggesting legal arrangements, just to be practical, asking carefully worded questions about inheritance structures. He had laughed them off, impressed by her forward thinking. Now, standing in a hospital corridor under flickering fluorescent lights, those memories rearranged themselves into a far darker picture. He moved closer, staying out of sight. The door to his mother's room was slightly open. Inside, machines hummed softly. His mother lay pale against white sheets, smaller than he remembered, her chest rising shallowly. His fiancée stood beside the bed, and then he heard her voice clearly. She wasn't cruel, but she wasn't kind either. She spoke quickly, firmly, telling his mother not to worry about emotional things, reminding her that decisions had already been made, that stress would only make things worse. There was no warmth in her words, no tenderness, only impatience masked as concern. His mother tried to speak, her voice weak, barely audible. His fiancée leaned closer, not to comfort her, but to control the conversation. Something inside him broke quietly. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't exhaustion. This was character. He stepped back, his heart pounding louder than the machines in the room. For the first time in his life, he felt truly unprepared. Not for a market crash, not for a hostile takeover, but for the realization that the woman he planned to marry might see his mother not as family, but as an obstacle. And as he stood there, invisible and shaken, he understood that the next choice he made would define not just his future, but the kind of man he truly was. He didn't confront her immediately. That surprised even him. Old instincts kicked in, the instincts that had built empires. Observe first, act later. He leaned against the cold wall, grounding himself, forcing his breathing to slow. Inside that room lay the woman who had sacrificed everything for him. Outside it stood the woman who wanted to share his future. And somewhere between them, the truth was unraveling thread by thread. The nurse returned, adjusting in four, speaking softly to his fiancée. He noticed how she corrected the nurse twice, each time with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Power dynamics. Control. It was subtle, but once seen, impossible to ignore. His mother shifted slightly, wincing. His fiancée checked her watch. That single gesture hurt more than any words. He remembered being sick as a child, burning with fever in a tiny apartment while his mother sat by his bed all night, cooling his forehead with a damp cloth, whispering stories to distract him from pain. She never checked the time then. She never left his side. That memory rose now like a quiet accusation. Finally, he straightened. Enough watching, enough hiding. He stepped forward and pushed the door open. The room went silent. His fiancée turned, surprise flashing across her face before she masked it with a practiced smile. "You're here," she said, as if she hadn't noticed his absence until that second. His mother's eyes fluttered open. When she saw him, they filled with relief so raw it pierced his chest. He crossed the room in 3 steps and took her hand, feeling how fragile it was. How light. "I'm here, Ma." He whispered. He felt it then. Clarity. Sharp and undeniable. Behind him, his fiancée cleared her throat, launching into explanations. Traffic, confusion, wanting to help. He didn't look at her. Not yet. He focused on his mother, who squeezed his fingers weakly. Her lips moved, struggling to form words. He leaned closer. "Don't," she murmured. "Don't let pressure." He turned to his fiancée at last. There was no anger in his voice, only calm. That frightened her more than shouting ever could. He asked simple questions. Why hadn't she called him? Why was she discussing matters that weren't hers to handle? Why did his mother look distressed after speaking with her? She hesitated. Too long. Her answers came quickly after that, layered with excuses, deflections, and subtle guilt-tripping. She spoke about stress, about responsibility, about what's best for everyone. But she never once said she was sorry. That was the final truth in that hospital room. Under the cold glow of medical lights, he understood that love without compassion was just ambition wearing a mask. And once the mask slipped, there was no putting it back on. He asked her to step outside. The request was quiet, but it wasn't negotiable. His fiancée followed him into the hallway, heels clicking sharply against the floor, her expression already hardening. The door closed behind them, sealing off the steady beeping of machines and the fragile breath of his mother. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Then she laughed softly, as if trying to dissolve the tension. She said he was overreacting. She said hospitals made people emotional. She reminded him how much he had handled while he was busy building his empire. That word "handled" hung in the air between them. He studied her face, really studied it, without the filter of love or expectation. What he saw was not concern, but calculation. Not fear, but annoyance. He told her what he had heard, word for word. Her smile faltered. She crossed her arms, shifting tactics instantly. Now she sounded wounded, accused. She asked if he really believed his mother's confused impressions over her intentions. That was when something inside him went cold. "Don't," he said quietly. She froze. For the first time since he'd known her, she looked uncertain. He explained calmly that his mother might be weak, but she wasn't foolish. That kindness wasn't confusion. That pressure disguised as care was still pressure. He told her he had seen enough to know that whatever she felt, it wasn't love the way his mother had taught him to understand it. Her voice rose then. She spoke of sacrifices, of standing by him, of the life they had planned. She mentioned the wedding, the contracts, the future. She never mentioned his mother again. That was the moment he made his decision. He told her the engagement was over. The words landed heavily, final and irreversible. She stared at him, disbelief giving way to anger. She accused him of throwing everything away over a misunderstanding. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply said that the kind of woman who could not show patience to a sick mother would never be trusted with a family. Security escorted her out quietly. There was no scene, no raised voices, just the quiet collapse of something that had never been as solid as it looked. When he returned to his mother's room, she was awake, watching him. He sat beside her again, brushing her hair gently back from her face. Tears slid silently down his cheek, not from loss, but from relief. He had almost made the greatest mistake of his life. Almost she squeezed his hand weakly and smiled. "You saw," she whispered. "Yes," he replied, "because you taught me how." The hours that followed passed slowly, measured in heartbeats and hushed footsteps. He stayed by his mother's bedside, ignoring calls, postponing meetings, letting the world he owned wait for once. Nurses came and went. Doctors spoke in careful tones. Prognoses were uncertain, but there was hope. And for the first time that night, he allowed himself to breathe. His mother slept, sedated and peaceful. In the quiet, he reflected on how close he had come to building a future on the wrong foundation. Love, he realized, wasn't proven during celebrations or public appearances. It was revealed in private moments, when no one was watching and nothing could be gained. By morning, the sun rose pale and tired through the hospital windows. His mother woke briefly, asking for water, asking for him. He was there each time, wordlessly present. And when she smiled at him, weak but genuine, he felt richer than he ever had. News of the broken engagement spread quickly, as such things always did in their world. Speculation followed. He ignored it all. There would be statements later, explanations crafted for public consumption. But the truth would remain something far simpler and far more personal. Days later, his mother's condition stabilized. She wasn't out of danger, but she was improving. When she was strong enough to speak properly, she told him she had feared this moment, not the illness, but the possibility that he would choose comfort over character, that he would mistake charm for kindness. He held her hand and promised her something then, that he would never again confuse success with worth, that he would protect the value she gave him as fiercely as he protected his company's. When she finally left the hospital weeks later, he walked beside her, slower than his usual pace, matching her steps. Outside, cameras waited. Reporters shouted questions. He shielded her gently, guiding her into the car. The billionaire the world knew returned to business eventually. But something in him had shifted permanently. He listened more. He trusted differently. And when people asked him why the engagement ended, he gave the same answer every time, because I learned who she was when it mattered most. And that lesson, taught in a hospital hallway under harsh white lights, became the most valuable inheritance his mother would ever give him. The hospital released his mother under strict conditions, and he personally ensured she was moved into a quiet recovery suite overlooking a garden instead of returning home immediately. He adjusted his entire schedule around her needs, something his younger self would never have believed possible. Meetings were shortened. Deals were delegated. For the first time in decades, the world bent to something other than his ambition. Sitting beside her window one afternoon, watching sunlight move slowly across the floor, she spoke more openly than she had in years. She admitted she had noticed small things about his former fiancée from the beginning, how she listened only when it benefited her, how kindness seemed performative rather than instinctive. She confessed she had stayed silent because she feared pushing him away or appearing controlling. Love, she told him, sometimes meant trusting people to see truth on their own. Those words stayed with him long after she fell asleep. He began replaying his relationship from the beginning, seeing it clearly now. The admiration that had felt like affection, the ambition mistaken for support, the subtle impatience whenever something didn't revolve around success or image. None of it had felt alarming before because it aligned with the life he was living, then a life of speed, appearances, and constant motion. But illness had slowed everything down. And in the stillness, truth had become impossible to ignore. That night, alone in his office, He canceled the wedding venue, returned the ring, and instructed his legal team to dissolve every shared arrangement. Each action felt less like loss and more like reclaiming something he had almost given away. He didn't feel anger toward her anymore, only clarity. And clarity, he realized, was peace. When his mother woke the next morning, she sensed the change immediately. He was lighter, quieter, more present. She smiled knowingly and said nothing. Some lessons didn't need words. Weeks passed, and life attempted to return to normal. But normal no longer fit him the way it once had. Invitations poured in, galas, conferences, celebrations meant to reassert his place in the world. He declined most of them. Instead, he spent evenings cooking simple meals with his mother, listening to stories he'd heard before but never truly absorbed. Stories of failure, of fear, of surviving with dignity when life offered no guarantees. Public curiosity intensified. The broken engagement became a topic of fascination. Rumors twisted the narrative into something scandalous. He let them. For the first time, he didn't feel the need to correct the world's assumptions. The people who mattered already knew the truth. One afternoon, his mother asked him a question that caught him off guard. "Are you afraid to love again?" He considered it carefully before answering. He admitted he wasn't afraid of love, but of ignoring his instincts again, of choosing convenience over character. She nodded approvingly. "Then you've learned," she said. That night, he made a quiet decision. He stepped back from the parts of his empire that required constant performance and leaned into the parts that created real impact. He redirected resources toward healthcare initiatives, funding patient advocacy programs and caregiver support projects inspired directly by what he'd witnessed in the hospital, not as publicity, as purpose. For the first time, success felt aligned with something deeper than growth charts and quarterly reports. One evening, while walking through the hospital garden with his mother, he watched a young man help his elderly father onto a bench, speaking gently, patiently. The scene struck him harder than he expected. Wealth could buy comfort, but presence, true presence, was priceless. His mother noticed his gaze and squeezed his arm. "That's what matters," she said softly. Later that week, he received an unexpected message from his former fiancée. It was brief, carefully worded. She apologized not for her actions, but for how things ended. He read it once, then deleted it without replying. Closure didn't require conversation. It required boundaries. His mother's strength returned slowly but steadily. Each improvement felt like a gift. And with every passing day, he felt gratitude for the night that had exposed the truth before it was too late. He realized then that the hospital hadn't taken something from him. It had saved him from a life built on illusion, from a partnership that would have drained him quietly over time. Painful revelations, he learned, were often acts of mercy in disguise. Months later, his life looked very different. Quieter mornings, fewer cameras, more meaning. He still ran companies, still made decisions that shaped thousands of lives, but he no longer mistook authority for fulfillment. His mother watched this transformation with quiet pride. One afternoon, she told him something she had never shared before. During her illness, she had feared she might not survive. Her greatest worry hadn't been death, and had been leaving him tied to someone who didn't love him the way he deserved. Hearing that brought tears he didn't try to hide. He thanked her then, not just for raising him, but for trusting him enough to let him choose his own awakening. The experience reshaped how he viewed people. He became slower to trust words and quicker to notice actions. Kinder without being naive. Strong without being hardened. And in time, he understood the real inheritance she was giving him wasn't wealth, or even wisdom, but discernment. Years later, when people asked him about the turning point in his life, he never mentioned the billions, the companies, or the accolades. He spoke about a hospital hallway, about a quiet observation, about choosing courage over comfort. His mother lived long enough to see him become the man she always believed he could. Be one who measured success not by accumulation, but by integrity. When she eventually passed, it was peacefully, with him by her side, holding her hand just as she once held his. At her funeral, he didn't speak of loss. He spoke of gratitude. Gratitude for lessons learned at the hardest moment. Gratitude for truth revealed before it was too late. Gratitude for love that asked for nothing in return. And as he walked away from the grave that day, it carried with him a certainty that no amount of money could ever buy. The knowledge that character reveals itself when power is tested, and love reveals itself when nothing is gained. That was the night he stopped being just a billionaire and started being a man. In the end, he realized that the night he rushed to the hospital, thinking he might lose his mother, was actually the night he was saved from losing himself. Wealth had given him power, access, and admiration, but it had also blinded him, surrounding him with people who loved what he represented more than who he was. Lying in that quiet hospital room, holding his mother's fragile hand, he finally understood a truth she had lived by her entire life. Real love doesn't rush you, pressure you, or calculate what it can gain. It waits. It protects. It shows up when there is nothing to win. The woman he almost married disappeared from his life without drama or revenge, because some endings don't need punishment, they need clarity. His mother recovered enough to return home, and with her healing came his own. He slowed down, listened more, trusted actions over promises, and rebuilt his life around values instead of appearances. And years later, when people asked him how a single hospital visit changed everything, he never spoke about betrayal or heartbreak. He simply said this: sometimes life gives you a warning before a mistake becomes permanent, and the bravest thing you can do is listen.